Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are back for my MSI Play-Ins Day 3 overview and analysis video. We've got two more series to cover here, but these are the two most important series that we have covered yet at MSI, because the winners of both of these series will have officially qualified out of play-ins and into the main stage of the midseason invitational. So a lot on the line for the four teams that are going to be playing off today. All four of them have already won a series here at MSI. Let's see who can make it 2 for 2 by the end of this video. Of course, let me know down in the comments section below what you guys thought of the games today. Who did you think was going to win each series, and then did it live up to your expectations? What was your favorite game? What was your favorite matchup? Etc, etc. If you want to know my thoughts, not only on the teams that are in this in terms of, you know, everything that's going down, their playstyle, the player rankings, the team rankings, how I view them all, you can check out my MSI Primer video if you want to know my thoughts on their first series of the tournament, I guess you could say. You can check out my Day 1 and Day 2 analysis. The link to the MSI playlist that has all of those videos is going to be up in the iCard right now. I highly recommend you check those videos out either before or after watching this one if you want a more detailed breakdown of MSI. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Of course, we're going to be covering both series, going over every game individually, talking about the strengths and the weaknesses that each team was able to show off. And that means we're going to kick it off with Group A. They actually were the second team to go on Day 2, and now they're going to kick off Day 3, and it's a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LPL in Bilibili Gaming and the number 2 seed from the LCS in Golden Guardians. Now, on paper, I think a lot of people would see this as a really big advantage for BLG, and while I do agree, I definitely think BLG is definitely the stronger team on paper. Golden Guardians is one of those teams that you never really know what you're going to get with them. You know, watching the LCS all year, they are super momentum reliant and momentum dependent, but when they do have that momentum on their side, they are genuinely one of the tougher teams to take out. They do a lot of things well, and I think that BLG definitely needs to take this series seriously, or else, you know, they might be in for a little bit of a shock. They definitely should be the favorites. Elk is by far the best player in this series. I think Bim also has a major advantage, at least on paper, in the top lane, and both of those lanes I would consider, you know, very important in terms of the matchup. But again, Golden Guardians absolutely crushed GAM. They've already proven that they are at least a competent team here at MSI, and not a team that you can take completely, you know, for granted, and BLG definitely does not want to run into that situation. Both of these teams have pretty similar play styles. Both of them like to win in the early game. They're not great team fighters, although I do think that's a little bit more the case for BLG. Their early game is better than Golden Guardians, and that's Golden Guardians' strength, but I do think Golden Guardians is a little bit more balanced. Their team fight potential, I think, is higher as a team. They just haven't actually been able to unlock that, at least over the course of the LCS season. So it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening in this series, but of course, we're going to cover it game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take the first game of the series. They're able to go up 1-0, which in a best of 3 in particular is very important, obviously. That means that Golden Guardians would now have to win both of the final 2 games, 2 games in a row against BLG, to be able to win the series, which is just significantly less likely. And so, really, really good start for BLG. Big game number 1, and honestly, they looked like the better team basically the entirety of this game. Now, Golden Guardians did make some plays, and they stayed aggressive, which I think is the positive that you want to give this team. It's something that they have consistently done over the course of the entire year. They are an aggressive team. They are an aggressive team in the early game is what I meant to say there. They are an aggressive team in the early game, and I think that definitely showed here. Their mid game actually really wasn't all that bad at all, but BLG was just a little bit too far ahead, and their team fight execution was just a tad bit better in this game, and so they're able to walk away with the win. But what ended up happening? Well, BLG get off to a pretty hot start, a really big gank gone wrong in the top lane for Golden Guardians. River, it feels like he's tracking June's pathing. It definitely feels like he's guessing that BLG didn't leash here and that June's not going to be on the top side of the map as he goes for this gank onto Bin. Unfortunately, June shows up, and then all of a sudden, it's pretty doomed. The Vi gets immediately onto the Kindred. The Kindred dies fast. Malphite tries to trade back onto the Gnar, but he's unsuccessful. It's a pretty easy double kill in the top lane to start the game, and that puts GG pretty far behind, you know, just to start off. Not a great start, and I think BLG does a good job trying to capitalize on that around the rest of the map, really trying to make River's life a lot more difficult in the early game. I think that was really the goal of June, and I definitely think he executed on that. Gory gets caught mid by June again. River was in the area, but there's really not a lot that he can do. And then they try to take a bot River fight, GG that is, but BLG absolutely demolished them, and now you're looking at a pretty solid lead. We're looking at about a 3 or a 4K gold lead at like 8, 9, 10 minutes into the game, which is really, really nice for BLG. I talked about how I thought their early game would be better, and that definitely, went into fruition in game number 1 at the very least here, and I do think that that's going to matter a lot when it comes to the series, and, BLG being able to control the tempo, I think is massive for their team in general. Rest of the early game is relatively consistent with BLG getting advantages by just finding GG players around the map. However, GG does get back into the game with a really nice fight in the mid lane. River actually plays this one really well, and this is what I was talking about where, yes, he made quite a few mistakes in the early game on this Kindred, a very aggressive pick, obviously something that June picks, or that June plays a lot of, but, River obviously wanted to flex the muscle a bit here, another champion that he plays quite a bit of. And, wasn't a great early game, but the mid-game team fighting was actually really solid. Gory continues to be really aggressive on the Lissandra, continuing to try to make plays, and I think Kindred doing a really good job trying to follow up on a lot of those plays, and they're actually able to pull the gold back to about like a 1-2K gold lead instead of it, ballooning out of control, which I think is a really big thing for Golden Guardians. He did not want to let this game get out of control, and this is a big question mark for BLG, is if they can hang on to a lot of the leads they were able to generate for themselves. This was a struggle for them in the LPL playoffs. It's going to be interesting to see if that changes internationally at all, maybe facing some of this, I don't want to say worse competition, but, facing, not LPL competition. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if that still is a problem. The problem for GG in this game was that second Herald fight. It just completely destroyed them. It completely changed the game, and it really put it out of reach. Second Herald came up. Golden Guardians is able to get it. They're able to steal it, and they're able to pick up a pretty early kill, but the unbelievable wombo of them just, I guess, not tracking the Gnar Rage Bar, Gnar going Mega, getting a 4-man ult right into an Aphelios ult, and everybody just melts, and BLG dominates the fight. I believe they get 4. They might have gotten all 5. It was something dominant, and BLG from that point onwards just kind of controls the game. They eventually take a fight at, I believe it's 3rd drag. It might be 4th drag that Golden Guardians is actually able to get from just slightly better positioning, but they get absolutely destroyed in the fight afterwards. That lets BLG get Baron, and from that point, they can just run it down mid and just kind of end the game. I think they actually ran it down top, but either way, BLG has a lot of strengths coming out of this game, a lot of things that you can look at and be really positive about. My player of the game is going to go to Bin on this Gnar. A lot of fantastic engages. Now, partly you can blame Golden Guardians for how successful Bin was in this game because it's not like the Gnar Rage Bar is hidden. You can see it. You know when he's about to go Mega, and it didn't necessarily feel like they were prepping for it all that well in a lot of these team fights, but at the end of the day, Bin still had to execute on a lot of these ultimates, on a lot of these engages, and I thought he did a really good job. We were looking at Bin versus Licorice as a pretty massive advantage on the side of BLG. This is something that I think a lot of people would expect BLG to be able to generate a lead off of, and Bin had a really good game number 1. I think I want to give a lot of credit to Elk as well. The damage coming out, not only in that Herald fight, but in the late game was really good, even if his early laning phase didn't really matter all that much. Aphelios into Jinx, that's kind of going to happen. Both want to scale up, and neither really has the tools to be able to take advantage of the other. On with some fantastic engages on the Rakan. He also got caught out multiple times just like walking around. Like the Hylissang comparisons are definitely showing through at this international event because it was a very Hylissang-esque game of fantastic playing a team fight, and then 3 minutes later it's just randomly in the enemy jungle and dying. Like, that's definitely On's playstyle, but for the most part I would consider it a positive. There's a reason I like the player a lot. And then Jun and Yagao were also good. Yagao's scoreline looks great. I don't think the Ahri was all that influential in this game, but, really, really good scoreline. And then Jun, I thought, made some really good plays in the early game to shut down River on the Kindred. Over on the side of Golden Guardians, though, not a great early game, and that's really going to be kind of the thing that I want to focus on. Golden Guardians relied a lot on their early game in the LCS in North America, and they kind of got stomped in the early game here. Pretty much every play that they wanted to go for was countered. Really good scouting by BLG. Really good job by Jun to make sure that River couldn't get on the board, couldn't get marks. That Kindred had like 3 marks for the entirety of the mid game, and that is such a feels bad. Like, that is, it is one of the most depressing feelings you can possibly have. River is going to get my dud of the game. I do think he made some good plays in the mid game. That fight in the mid lane that I think was really positive for them, that kind of brought the game a little bit closer, was really initiated by River and by Gory, and so Definitely want to give them a shout for that, but River's early game was so bad that it gave BLG a lead that they never really surrendered, and so he's unfortunately going to get my dud of the game. Kind of an aggressive Kindred pick here. It wasn't even really a takeaway because BLG had already selected the Vi. I think Gory also was just a little bit over-aggressive in this game. I do like to see the aggression. I like to see these teams going for these kinds of plays, but I don't think it necessarily worked out. Kuki wasn't all that good on the Renata, a couple of really bad ultimates over the course of this game, and then 6A and Licorice were just kind of there. I don't think either played particularly bad. They just couldn't really get a lot done in this game in particular. But for Golden Guardians, I think what you're looking at in terms of game 2, if you really want to bounce back here and, make it the first non-sweep of the entire MSI play-ins, I think you're going to be looking for a better early game. If you can execute a bit better on some of the plays that you were trying to make in this one, I do think that you're not in a bad spot. Like, you showed that you were at the very least able to, team fight against BLG at parts of this game. You just can't put yourself in the hole that you did in the early game. And then for BLG, just keep this up. If you can continue to track River, if you can continue to punish the aggressive plays that you can pretty predictably expect Golden Guardians to make, I think you're going to be in a pretty good spot. And so, how's it going to go down in game number 2? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to tie up the series at 1 apiece, and this is the first best of 3 that is actually going to be going to 3 games here at MSI. I can't believe it, man. Golden Guardians taking a game off of Bilibili Gaming. Now that is something I did not have on my 2023 bingo card. But here we are, and man, was it a fun game. This was a 40-minute banger that looked like it was completely in the hands of BLG after the early game, but Licorice said, no, this is my game to dominate. This is my game to win, and I will not be denied. And Golden Guardians are able to pull it back. They're able to win it, and we're moving to a game number 3 here, and I'm incredibly excited about that. But what ended up happening in this game? Because there's a lot. There's a lot that ended up happening. I'll try to sum it down at least a little bit here. But we started off in the bot lane. Like, there's really no other way to start off the analysis for this section, but with the bot lane absolutely getting destroyed. And you might think, well, Golden Guardians won. It was their bot lane who did really well, right? Absolutely not. Stixay and Huki are fodder. I mean, complete fodder in the early game here. They were miserable at the beginning of game number 2. Elk has like 5 kills at like 7 minutes into the game here. Stixay and Huki go for an aggressive 2v2 because they think they can win it with the Xayah Rakan. They don't win it. Elk and On are able to get a double kill off of that, and then they are able to pick up Stixay again, and then they're able to get another double kill a little bit later, and Elk is just sitting there like, okay, thanks for the donation of like, 2,000 free gold in the early game. I'll absolutely take that. Now, he does get shut down by River roaming down, and Huki kind of, moving along with the play, but by this point, Elk is ridiculously strong on a hyper-scaling Jinx, and so you're looking at this game at like 6, 7, 8 minutes in, and you're like, it's kind of over. BLG should just have this in the bag. There really isn't a lot of ways for Golden Guardians to be able to team fight from this point onwards, and I don't imagine that they're going to be able to move into the late game nearly as confidently, but Golden Guardians do start scratching and clawing their way back into the game. A nice 1-for-1 mid trade. They get a couple mid lane. Yagao being a little bit over aggressive. He ends up getting caught along with Jun. Gory starts to play well. And then Licorice in the top lane, quite frankly, just starts gapping Bim incredibly hard. Not only is he super far up in CS, but he's super far up in tempo. Every play Licorice is there first. Bin has to expend basically every resource to even get into the fight. And really, in the mid game, he's never able to go mega. It's a really good job by Golden Guardians, timing out the Gnar. That was something I was really critical of from them in game number 1. I thought they did a fantastic job of that in game number 2, making sure that Bim was never really a problem. Licorice getting him out of the fights with the Cassante ult, and being able to just 1v1 him and kill him multiple times, taking advantage of Bin. It really started to turn into a split map situation where Golden Guardians was really strong up on the top side, and BLG was really strong on the bot side, and it really was just going to be about, which side was going to be a little bit more impactful, or if one of the mid laners could really make a difference, and both of those things ended up, coming to fruition with Golden Guardians actually being able to come out on top. Gory had a really good game on the Yasuo, super bold to see him pull this out. Not something he played all that much in the LCS, it's not like he's a Yasuo connoisseur, at least at the pro level over the course of the year so far, but a lot of confidence to be able to go to it in this game, and it really started to pay off in the mid to late game. That first Baron fight is really where things turned around. The gold was basically even at that point with Cassante and Jinx really being the focal points for each individual team, but BLG trying to contest Golden Guardians, who force start the Baron from even, and Elk gets caught out basically at the beginning of the fight. Really good target prioritization from Golden Guardians coming out. Elk dies, Bin dies, they go and refocus the Baron, they're able to kill June and secure the Baron, and then it's like, oh my god, Golden Guardians is actually winning this game at around 24-25 minutes, and that's absolutely massive. They take full control of the map from that point onwards, they start getting more picks, they start making sure Bin is even less useful, and they're focusing Elk in a lot of these team fights, and even though they aren't able to end on the first Baron, or even the second Baron, where they do get caught out, trying to end in the bot side and actually just kind of getting absolutely obliterated. Really good fight from BLG to try to get them back into the game. Third Baron is definitely enough, and they're able to close out the game from there. So just great stuff overall from Golden Guardians. I mean, who would have thought going into the series that they were going to be able to take a game, let alone for it to be off the back of Licorice in the top lane, who's absolutely going to get my player of the game here in game 2. I mean, what a dominant performance from him. The 7-3-5 scoreline honestly does not tell you how good he was this game. He dominated in lane, he dominated in the mid game, he dominated in the late game. He was perfect. Like, that you couldn't have asked for a better performance from your top laner in this one. And for a lot of the year, we were calling Licorice the weak link of Golden Guardians. Now, this was something I did push back on a little bit in my MSI Primer video. I was still a little bit lower on Licorice than, maybe, some other, like, diehard Golden Guardians fans were, but you have to remember the timeline of what he was over the course of the year. He was pretty bad in the regular season, especially in the first half of the regular season. He wasn't very good, but he got better over the second half at playing weak side, not necessarily being a problem. And then when you look back on the playoffs as a whole, when you exclude the finals, he was actually really good in playoffs. He was a big reason why that team ended up making the finals in the first place, is because he had a really good playoff run. So it felt like Licorice had kind of been leveling up over the course of the year, and it really feels like it culminated here in this game against Bin, where I have no other way to say it other than he mega gapped Bin in this game. Like, it was not close. Bin was miserable, and Licorice was making him look like a low-tier top laner at this tournament, and it was incredible to watch. Really good stuff. Gory also had a really good game on the Yasuo, some really consistent ultimates. He was being really aggressive with his positioning, and honestly, if he wasn't as good as he was in this game, I'm not sure if Golden Guardians wins, even with how good Licorice was. It was the solo lane duo that really pushed GG across the finish line. River had some good ultimates, was really good as frontline for this team. And then, shout out Stixay and Huhi, they were able to win the game even though they fed their asses off at the beginning. Certainly they are going to be thanking their top and mid for being able to win this game, but they did play well in the late game. I thought Huhi's engages towards the back half were pretty solid. Stixay didn't make any major mistakes after 10 minutes. It was just that early game that was so miserable that they probably deserved to lose the game off of that, but credit to Licorice, credit to Gory, they were able to get it done. As for BLG on the other side, shocking that they were able to lose this game. Bin's gonna get my dud of the game. He, again, like I said, he was mega gapped in the top lane. This wasn't just Licorice having a good game. Like, Bin looked like a child up there compared to him, and I don't really know what to say from that. Like, it was just a bad game overall from him. He did negative damage. He had no pressure. Just a really bad game from him overall. I didn't think June was all that good on the Vi either, but poor Elk, man. I mean, how do you have this kind of game and still lose? The dude was targeted first in every single team fight, and yet it just didn't matter. He was doing so much damage. He was able to pick up a quadra at like 30 minutes into the game, stopping second Baron. He absolutely destroyed the first, team fight, the first everything of the game. The first 7 minutes of the game were all Elk. Like, to have this game be a loss for you is devastating, and he played phenomenal, but it just goes to show you that League of Legends really is a team game, and even if you have a super fed Jinx, sometimes it doesn't work out if you don't have the peel to be able to let her team fight. And so, for BLG, I mean, you gotta get back on track. That top side has to solidify. Bin simply has to have a better game. Yagao simply has to have a better series. I would argue that Gory has just been better over the course of the first two games, which is kind of shocking. Not super shocking, because again, I'm high on Gory, but you gotta hope Yagao is going to get better, and you just gotta hope that Elk has the opportunity to be able to carry like he probably should have in game number 2. And then for GG, continue this. I mean, you lost the early game again, but you came back in pretty fantastic fashion, so really good game from Golden Guardians. They are a momentum-based team, and the momentum really is on their side going into this game 3. We all thought it was impossible for them to be able to knock off BLG, but it is definitely within their grasp. They've only got one game left to do it. And so who's going to win that game number 3? Who's going to be moving on to the main stage of MSI? Is it going to be BLG or is it going to be Golden Guardians? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to take the series, and they crush the hopes and dreams of upset fans everywhere around the world, because Golden Guardians came very close. They put up a really good fight. They just weren't able to get it done in the end. This was the most dominant game of the series by a considerable margin. BLG won this really without a lot of effort. They continued to play towards the strengths that they had shown basically the entire series up until this point, which was destroying bot lane. That absolutely continued in this game. Golden Guardians certainly had a draft that I will kind of get into. Again, I'm not the draft guy. I think draft matters, but only as much as, it can. I think gameplay matters more than draft. You have to put yourself in a position to win with the tools that you have given yourself. Obviously, some drafts just give you more tools, which is great, but every draft has tools. Like, every draft can win some way. Like, you know what I mean? And so, Golden Guardians not really giving themselves a lot of tools, not giving themselves a lot of favors with this draft, and BLG definitely taking advantage of it. But I think, obviously, the most telling thing in the entire world is that Bin clearly feels that Golden Guardians is the toughest team that he has played all year long because he played a tank. This is like the first time I've seen Bin play a tank. He didn't do that against 369. He didn't do that against Ale. He didn't do that against any of the other top laners he played against in the LPL. But Licorice, now that's a man that he fears that he has to pull out the Scion against. But let's go ahead and talk about what ended up happening in the game. BLG continued to dominate the early game using the same strategy that they have used throughout the entire series up until this point. Dominate Stixxay and Huhi, because Stixxay's always going to be pushed up. He's consistently going to be trying to make plays, and Huhi's not always going to be there to bail him out. They end up diving for a double kill for First Blood in the bot lane. Really well executed. They do a good job on that. And then Stixxay's just too far forward. Huhi goes out to try and get wards, and Stixxay not respecting the power that BLG has, and he dies again. Stixxay, spoiler alert, was just really bad in this series. Like, a lot of head-scratching decisions. I know I talk about how I love aggressive AD carries. I love players who go and try to make their own offense. I love that out of the role in itself, and Stixxay's done a good job of that in North America, but man, like, you have to know when to use that power, right? You can't just be pushed up all the time. You're gonna get punished for it consistently, and man, Stixxay got punished a lot in this series for his positioning. It certainly won't be the last time in this game that he is just not in the place that he is supposed to be, but really big early game for BLG. Elk gets really strong again. Drink if you've heard that one before, right? But just a good early game, I would say, from BLG, continuing to play to their strengths. GG does stay aggressive in the mid game. They go for a lot of plays. They get a nice pick in the mid lane. Golden Guardians do, mess up a play. They're at least still able to pull something back. River playing really aggro in the mid game, and Stixxay definitely playing aggro, but that aggressiveness is definitely caught out at multiple points throughout the mid game. They have a really nice fight in the mid lane that actually looks pretty solid, with River being able to initiate and get out, but Stixxay just way too far forward, continues to try to make a play happen even after it is far over, and just gets picked off for giving gold over to the enemy team, basically for no reason. Again, it was a really negative early game from Stixxay, and definitely gave Elk a lot of gold that he ended up using. And, credit to June. I actually thought he had a really good early game as well, but, you gotta give credit to GG. They didn't roll over and die. Even when they were down 5k gold in the mid game, they weren't afraid to at least go and try to make plays. River, in particular, was trying to aggress and trying to make plays. He was also caught out multiple times, but at the very least, the plays that he did try to make were relatively positive. And then BLG controlled the entire mid to late game of this entire game. They got every single objective. They won every single fight. And even though they tried to end a couple of times, they had to wait for 2 Barons instead of 1. And GG did a good job, slowing fights down in their own base and actually being able to push BLG out by making Elk a little bit more scared to full initiate. There really was no path backwards for Golden Guardians. This draft didn't give them a lot of options to try to win from behind, especially with the Jinx super useless this game, and so Golden Guardians end up folding in their own base, and the series is over. Credit to BLG. They kept their mental, and that's what you really want to see. They completely threw game number 2, and honestly, when you look at game number 1 as a whole, like, they really weren't the team that should have been walking out of that with a win after the mid game, but they did play well towards the back half. They made better decisions, and they were able to take it. And so, credit to BLG. Walking out of the series with the win is massive. However, the question marks absolutely still remain. Yagao had a much better game in game number 3, easily his best of the series, but he was not good over the first couple of games. Gory, for all of his problems in the early game, definitely had better team fighting potential than anything Yagao had over the course of this series. And, even in this game number 3, where I thought some of his scatters were really good, I'm not super sold on how Yagao's been playing at MSI so far. I thought Bin was significantly more consistent on the Scion. June had a really good game on the Vi. And then credit to Elk and On. They were great the entire series. Elk in particular. He's going to get my player of the game, and he's going to get my player of the series. Not that that's a shock to anybody. He was the shining light for BLG throughout this entire one. But for them, like, again, good early games and not being able to close it out, that was the worry that we were going to get with BLG going to an international event. That's definitely what they were giving us a lot of in the LPL. Hopefully they can clean some of that up as we move into the main stage now. But for Golden Guardians, they're not out of the tournament. They're not done yet. Just definitely a disappointing loss. You kind of expected them to be dropping down here. They really shouldn't have been in contention with BLG in the first place, but they played their hearts out, and they definitely played well. Maybe with the exception of Stixay. I hate to rag on him, but it just wasn't a very good series. Huhi also wasn't very good. He was pretty solid towards the back half of game number 2, but the early laning phase from both of these two was miserable, basically in all 3 games. Stixay is going to get dead of the game here again. And really, it was bot diff that completely destroyed this series. If Stixay and Huki were remotely passable in the early game of any of these games, like, Golden Guardians has a much better chance of actually being able to win. Gory was all right in game number 3 here. His scoreline looks good, but, you know, a lot of that was cleanup kills. River was trying to make plays, but couldn't really make them happen. And Licorice, what's he really going to do as a poppy into a Scion? And so, overall, positives for Golden Guardians. Licorice looked phenomenal in this series when he was given the opportunity to actually play the game. I thought Gory had his moments as well, especially on the Yasuo, drawing a ban out of it in game number 3 is really funny. And then Rivers certainly had moments as well. He was good in team fights. And just generally, I think the team looked better in the late game, but the bot lane simply has to survive the early game in order to have any sort of relevance. There's only one more spot to get out after today's games, and Golden Guardians definitely are going to be wanting to get that spot and maybe expecting to get that spot, but they're going to have to play better than they did, the bot lane in particular, today in order to get that. And then for BLG, congratulations again. Hopefully they can clean up some of their mistakes, but, you know, getting into the main stage really shouldn't have been as difficult as it was for this team. And now we get to move on to our second series of the day here, and this one, I think, on paper, was expected to be a lot closer than maybe the first one was. Obviously, Golden Guardians definitely showing up in that first series, but this one I'm actually really intrigued by. Not that I think there isn't a favorite in it, but rather I do like both of these teams quite a bit. It was a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LEC in G2 Esports and the number 1 seed from the PCS in PSG Talon. In my opinion, the best wildcard region team in the world right now is PSG Talon. I really like how Junjie and Yubao in particular have been able to play together. Yubao is very sneakily one of the more interesting players at this entire tournament, and Wako, I think, has been really good. I love aggressive AD carries, and man, is Wako an aggressive AD carry. And I think going up against a team like G2, who, yes, talent-wise is right up there with anybody else in the West, anybody else at that tournament, at that level, right? But they haven't exactly been in the best form as of recent. Now, they did absolutely destroy Loud in that game number 2, but game 1 was relatively close. And I think this series could also be relatively close. I like PSG Talon. I don't think it's going to be a blowaway. I do have G2 winning this, as you know, for my predictions in my primer video, but I don't think the PSG Talon is just a complete pushover. I think that the series should be relatively interesting. Yubao into Caps is definitely the matchup I'm looking out for the most. 2 very experienced players internationally that have, I assume, have played each other before, just with the amount of times both of them have played internationally, and I think that's really going to determine how this series goes. Of course, Yike versus Junjie, also a super integral matchup because of how important Yike is to the rest of G2, but what ended up happening in this series? Who ended up taking it, and who's going to be moving on to the main stage alongside Bilibili Gaming? Well, we're going to find out now as we go game by game, starting, of course, with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They are able to take the first game in this series, but it was not a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. This was a relatively close game for both teams. G2 definitely controlling a large portion of it, but PSG doing a good job to show that they are not just going to lay down and die. They're going to put up a resistance towards the back half, and you can never really count this team out. That's what I was talking about with PSG going into this tournament. If you go back and check out the primer, which, hey, small plug, like, almost everything I've said in that video has become true so far at this tournament, so please go check it out. I promise I've watched all these regions and I put a lot of time in, and I promise it's worth checking out. But, you know, if you go back and watch that video, what I said about PSG Talon was that their early games can be a little bit inconsistent, but because of the consistency that I guess they team fight with and their macro decisions towards the back half of the game, they're never really going to be out in a game. And definitely even against, you know, talented teams, they can be able to grab advantages towards the back half. I think I said that almost verbatim in that primer video, and you know what? That is exactly what happened in this game, but G2 just a little bit more clinical towards the back half of the game, and they're able to take it. So what ended up happening in this game Well, it all started with a pretty nice G2 lead in the early game. Really eclectic comp coming out from them. I would expect nothing less from G2. This is very much up their alley in terms of what they like to play. Yike is a big-time Kazakhs player from back in the day. That was something I talked about in my, LEC winter preview. I remember bringing that up, that he's really one of the only Kazakhs players that I've seen in pro actually be able to pull it off, or at least he did in the LFL, and so it's kind of wild to see him pull it out here on the MSI stage, but going to the Gragas mid, the EU special, the Kennen in the top lane to try and facilitate that, and then more of a stable bot lane with the Zyricon in the bot lane. I think this is a comp that can make the Kazakhs work, and you know what? The Kazakhs did work in the early game. He actually got pretty far ahead. Yike getting a lot of gold in the early game off of a couple of top lane fights. First of all, a nice dive in the top lane with Caps moving up to be able to pick off Junjia, who just had to sit under tower after an unfortunate rotation from him, and then Yike ends up trading his life in a 1-for-1 top, which is almost always going to be in favor of the Kazakhs, because if you are building gold on him in favor of, the Viego, Kazakhs is still going to be able to blow people up. The faster that he can hit his power spike towards that mid game, the better he is going to be, and so Yike doing a good job accelerating his growth in the early game. Really like the decision and the pathing from him in this game. Caps, I really got to talk about Caps, though, when you talk about the early to mid game, because he was everywhere on the map. Yike definitely being the jungler this game, he's moving around the map, ganking lanes, but Caps was also kind of playing the jungle role in this game on the Gragas, moving around lanes, not necessarily trying to take too many advantages in his own lane, but really trying to enable the rest of the map. He ends up going bot lane to be able to pick off Wacko, which is a really, really big one, and then that really enables G2's bot lane to start winning on their own. Hans and Mickey end up dominating Wacko in the 2v2, in the bot lane, the isolated 2v2, which is pretty massive, but Caps continues to make plays. He continues to move around the map with Yike. He makes top lane a problem, makes mid lane a problem, he makes bot lane a problem. Just a really good game overall from Caps, and, obviously Niski is definitely the more notable Gragas mid, at least after this split, but remember who Niski said he picked up the champion from. That was Caps in the first place, so a lot of really good stuff there. We're going to kind of fast forward a bit, because G2 just kind of stranglehold the mid game. They continue to grow their lead a little bit, but, PSG is definitely still in it, and that's really exemplified with the Baron dance. I mean, Baron comes up at 20 minutes, and G2 are looking for it basically on spawn, and PSG do not want to give it up, and we have a couple of back and forth moments where PSG try to, win the Baron fight, and they do relatively successfully, but Caps is still full health, and he comes in and cleans up the team, and so everybody's got to disperse, and then everybody comes back, and this is like a 2 or 3 minute long Baron dance, and PSG end up getting the Baron. Junjia gets in the pit and is able to steal it, and they're able to get out relatively cleanly, and that's a massive swing for PSG. It actually puts them back in pretty good control of this game. It gives them control of the dragon, which is pretty massive, and they don't really lose anything for going for that play. And so really, really nice stuff from PSG. Again, just good objective control and good knowledge of where exactly they need to be and how exactly they can get back into the game. That was always their strength in the PCS, was not giving up and knowing how to get back into the game. There are some major fights towards the back half of this game, most notably a big extended one to around 30-ish minutes. Both teams essentially go even, but this is definitely a positive for PSG as they're able to actually, stop G2 and start to generate more gold back. When you are the team with a gold deficit and you're going even in these massive extended fights towards the back half of the game, I'm definitely considering that a win for you. Unfortunately, the second Baron fight is a disaster, and that's really where things start to fall apart for PSG. G2 ends up getting Baron, and they end up absolutely destroying the fight. You end up going to Seoul, where PSG feels like they absolutely need to rush it and get it down before, G2 can end up getting it, but Yike goes in and he steals the Soul. They end up destroying the fight, and they end up being able to end the game. And so, good stuff from G2, not giving up in the late game, not getting outscaled. Broken Blade with some really good engages in a lot of these fights, but player of the game for me simply has to go to Caps. He was nearly perfect in this game. I mean, the early game roaming, being able to say, I don't need to be strong in my own lane. I can go move around. I can go dive top, or I can go, gank bot when they're not expecting it. Just a lot of really smart macro plays, and that's really what you've been getting with Caps over the course of 2023. He has not been a lane-dominant player. In fact, he's given up a lot in the mid lane to try and enable his jungle over the course of 2023. This game, he just did it for his side laners, and I definitely think that that was more of a positive, essentially him being the second jungler. Yike pulling out the Kazakhs and having it actually work at an international tournament is obviously super cool. I'm not expecting that to be something that continues against maybe the best teams in the world, but against a team like PSG in game number 1, definitely a risk that was worth taking, and it absolutely paid off. I thought Broken Blade's engages, like I said, were pretty good. Some of them not perfect, but some of them were fantastic, right? That Dragon Pit one definitely comes to mind. And then Hans and Mickey were really good as well, ending up being much stronger in the 2v2 and actually being able to beat the Lucian Nami, but For PSG Talon, some positives, definitely for sure. I thought Aji was actually really good in this game on the Malphite. His team fighting was exceptional. Not only the ultimates, but being able to deal a consistent amount of damage towards the back half, being able to peel off that Xayah in a lot of different circumstances, forcing her to use that ultimate, I think getting that out. And so you have, Annie, you've got Viego, even a Nami bubble that could potentially be a problem for that champion. It was really well played by Aji. Unfortunately, the rest of the team just wasn't perfect across the game. I thought there were some team fights where Junjia and Yubao were really, really good, but my dead of the game is going to go to Wako in the bot lane. Not because he was particularly bad. I don't think he made any egregious errors across the course of this game, but he just wasn't all that, active in terms of being able to push the game forward. I thought Aji was certainly more important. I thought Junjia was certainly more important, and I definitely think Yubao was more important, even if he maybe had more negative plays across the game. Wako just not necessarily involving himself in a lot of the positive plays that they were making, but PSG doing a good job to not lose their head, showing that the strengths that I kind of outlined in that primer and that they showed in the PCS are going to translate to an international level, them not being able to give up, them being very good at playing from behind. I think that definitely translated. Of course, you would have hoped that they would have been able to continue to win this game. They were certainly on a pretty good trajectory moving into that second Baron fight, but not everything's going to go their way. If they can get a little bit of a better early game, I definitely think that they're the type of team to just kind of be able to strangle out their opponents. But for G2, you got to be able to keep this momentum up. You probably don't want to go to a game 3. You're definitely feeling like you could win it, but you probably want to get this done in 2. You don't want to make this a long, drawn-out one. Get into that main stage. Start focusing on the better teams. That's what you're going to want. But PSG definitely wants to bring that to a game 3, and they definitely have the talent to be able to do so. So are they going to be able to do it, or is G2 going to close this out in a sweep? Well, the winner of game number 2 was G2 Esports. They are able to take the second game of this series. They're able to close it out with a 2-0 sweep, and we return to the normalcy that we kind of established in the first round, with 2-0 sweeps being the commonplace. And guess what? G2 fans, you have now officially qualified for the main stage of MSI 2023. Not that it was super in doubt. You definitely got the easier side of the bracket. And, not that that's a complaint. They were easily the best team on their side, and I do like PSG. That should really show you what G2 was on, and this was a dominant game in game number 2. Really good stuff. This was not game number 1, where it felt like PSG kind of started to get control back, that G2 wasn't being nearly as clinical towards the back half, but eventually figured it out. In this game, they just took control level 1, basically from moment 1, and never gave it away again. You cannot give Olaf over to G2. That is the takeaway from this game, because holy crap, was this a dominant performance from the G2 top laner. But let's go ahead and talk about how we ended up getting there. You obviously cannot talk about this game without talking about the level 1. Level 1, Junjia's like, yeah, I'm taking blue, I'm getting leashed by my top laner, by my Cassante, we're gonna be fine. Broken Blade's like, what if I just walked in and fought them both? And what if I just completely stopped the clear? Junjia, not expecting an Olaf to just run into him, has started W, because that's what you do on Vi, that's your fastest clear, but that means he can't fight, at all. There's actually literally nothing that he can do with just W onto Vi to stop this Olaf, and so he runs in. Aji starts getting attacked, and Junjia just simply has to take blue buff. I know a lot of people were really criticizing Junjia for this move, but the correct play here is to take blue buff, because if you hit that level 2 before Aji dies, there's a chance you can do something about it if you're able to get Q, but if you don't have that Q, you both just die if you try to 1v2 him, and so it was a good play by Junjia, or at least I shouldn't say good play. It was the right play by Junjia to, not try to interact, but Ashi just gets absolutely blown up. He ends up dying. Junjia hits level 2 and just has to Q out, saves his own life, but it's very, very, very bad start for PSG. They're basically doomed in the top lane from that point onwards. Olaf's going to have full control of that laning phase, and the Cassante is not going to be relevant at all. And then, 2 minutes after that, Yike ends up invading Junjia at his own wolves. He ends up killing him, basically for free. Yubao comes to try and help, but Yike does a great job dodging with the Viego mechanics to make sure that he doesn't end up going down, and Yubao has to run away. So it's basically 2 for nothing at the beginning of the game, and Junjia's game is entirely over at 3 or 4 minutes, and that is disaster on the side of PSG. You cannot allow your Viego, or the enemy Viego, to get this far ahead of the Vi, basically without any sort of consequences, and that's exactly what happened in this game. Vi needs to get that early lead on Viego to have any sort of relevance in the back half of this game, and that just did not happen. So Junjia's game was over in about 3 to 4 minutes, but there were some positives for PSG. There was a really nice fight around First Dragon in the bot lane for PSG Talon, because their bot lane was good, and then quite frankly, the bot lane was just much better in this game, as they end up winning a 2v2 in the bot lane to be able to just kind of establish Wako, or Wacko, sorry, I say Wako a lot, to establish Wako as, like, the strong AD carry in the game. And that's massive because the Aphelios, Aphelios is one of those champions that can legitimately pull this game back. It's going to be difficult because the Olaf on the top side does have gold, but, at least the PSG bot lane is doing well. That's going to be the positive that you're going to need to start fighting around. Unfortunately, all of the worries about that kind of came true because G2 just group in the mid lane and they're like, do something about it. Like, come on, either fight us or go make a play somewhere else, but we're going to group and we're going to take everything that we can possibly take, and PSG's choice was to try and group as well to fight that out with the strong Aphelios, try to get that front to back, but what's a little bit of a problem? A Ragnarocking Olaf jumping immediately on top of your Aphelios with a Lulu ult, with the speed up from Lulu. Like, there are so many problems with that, especially if you can get the Lissandra flanking on the backline, which there were multiple moments of in this game, and for as strong as Wako was in this one, there's really not a lot he could do to peel the Olaf off, and there was a couple of fights in the mid game that just completely blew the door open for G2 and just made it basically impossible for PSG to come back into the game. BB, what I have written in my notes is just runs down Wako so PSG can't do anything in fights, and that really was what exactly happened. I'll talk about Woody in a bit, but man, like, you have peel a little bit. You can't really peel the Olaf, right? But you can't be using Leona ult on a Ragnarok Olaf every fight. Like, it doesn't do anything. He's immune! And so that was definitely frustrating, but, poor Wako was trying his best to deal damage. He actually was doing a really good job of dealing that damage when he was alive. He just didn't really have a lot of opportunities to be alive. Eventually, G2 just continued to pound the base. They continue to move forward. Hans gets caught in the bot lane, but it doesn't really matter. G2 just wins the 4v5 anyways, and even though they're not able to end off the first push, and Wako actually does a great job defending 1v4 by himself in the base and actually saves the game by getting a double kill, which is pretty massive. He's not able to do it twice, and G2 was eventually able to close out the game with Broken Blade and Yike and Caps, particularly just being too strong. Mickey also had a pretty good one, but for G2, this is the kind of dominance you were looking for coming out of the play-in stage. Arguably the most dominant team in the play-in stage so far. This game was absolute disaster for PSG early on, and a lot of that was just really heads up, great early game play by Broken Blade and Yike in particular. If they're going to play like this, they're going to be a threat to a lot of different kinds of teams. Now, I do want to say, I heard a lot of people talking about play-in buffs for a lot of these teams. One thing that's worth noting, G2 did only get 4 games as a quote-unquote play-in buff. It's really not this, like, gigantic vat of experience that some Worlds play-ins get you, but at the very least, they got an idea to understand what they wanted to play at this level, and I think that could be positive, but this game, too, was dominant. Broken Blade's player of the game. How could he not be? He literally controlled every single fight the entirety of this game. Not only did he destroy Aji and Junji's game at level 1, but he was unstoppable. He made Wako completely irrelevant, even though he was super fed on this Aphelios throughout the entirety of the end game. So yeah, Broken Blade's player of the game, but I want to give a big shout out to Yike. He had a really good game on the Viego, some nice resets. Mickey did a great job enabling that Olaf. His job as a Lulu is just to make sure that the Olaf doesn't die nearly as quickly as he normally would. And then big credit to Caps. Caps is actually going to get my player of the series here. That might upset some people, but I think across both games, Caps was the most consistent. His macro and his ability to set up the rest of his teammates is just better than any other mid laner at this tournament, maybe even in the world. Like, he's just really good at knowing where exactly he needs to be to make the rest of his teammates look like $1,000,000. And he did that again with Lissandra here in game number 2. The flanks that he was on, the fantastic ultimates to set up, the Olaf just running in or the Viego trying to get the resets, all really good stuff. Hans was a little bit questionable. Score looks good, but not exactly the best positioning, and losing that 2v2 in the bot lane wasn't ideal, but he certainly could have had worse games. He was definitely dealing damage in teamfights, just probably the least, I would say the least important member of G2 across this series so far, but they were just so dominant. Broken Blade, Caps, Yike, Mickey, even Hans to an extent, we're all really, really good for this team, and definitely they're looking good and looking in good form going into the main stage here. And then for PSG Talon on the other side, definitely a disappointing way to lose this series. You were feeling pretty good after taking out DFM in the first round, like a lot of people predicted, but this series did not go your way. Aji and Junjia were miserable in game 2, even if they were all right in game number 1. Bao had no pressure. Woody, dud of the game. I mean, the dude continuously was Leona ulting the Olaf when he was ulted. It's like, what are you doing? You know it's not going to do anything. You have to know that it's not going to do anything. I get that maybe it's just like a last-ditch effort of like, maybe he doesn't press the button, or maybe I'm blind and he didn't press the button, but like, it was just such a waste. The champion felt like a completely useless pick by the time we hit the late game, and Woody's definitely deserving dud of the game for that, but poor Wako, really good game from him, just not really a lot that he could do in this circumstance to actually save it. I still think PSG has quite a bit of upside. I still think that they are one of the teams that I think is definitely in contention to be able to get out of play-ins. They were my pick for the team to get out of play-ins as the number 3 seed, but I think Golden Guardians have certainly exceeded expectations, but PSG can definitely still get back on track and get into that zone where I think they can be that team that ends up making it out of plans and into the main stage. This series, unfortunately, however, just doesn't give me a ridiculous amount of faith that they're going to be able to do that. But congratulations to G2. They're now in the main stage, and it wasn't really all that up for debate. They were definitely the best team on this side of the bracket. All right, but that is going to do it for my MSI Play-ins Day 3 overview and analysis. We know our first two teams to get out of play-ins, BLG in Group A, G2 in Group B. No surprises there. They're the teams that I think everyone expected to be able to make their way out in terms of how the bracket fell, but a lot of interesting games along the way. Tomorrow, we're going to be getting R7 versus GAM. We're going to be getting Loud versus DFM. Some really interesting matchups that are going to get us closer to determining who that third and final team to be making it out of play-ins will be. But of course, let me know down in the comment section below who you guys think is going to be making it out. Do you think it's going to be GG, PSG, or maybe one of the teams that lost in the first round? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback down below. Of course, let me know if you enjoyed the video as well. If you did, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to the channel. It also lets me know that you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to more people. It's like the triple whammy, you know what I mean? And so, if you did enjoy it, I would really appreciate it if you hit that button. And then, of course, hit that subscribe button if you're new here. I promise I'm going to be putting out good content over the course of MSI. We're covering every single day of action, as you've already seen through the first couple of days. And if you enjoyed this video and enjoyed the analysis I was giving, I assure you, you'll probably enjoy the rest. So hit that sub button, hit that bell so you can get notified when these videos go live for the rest of the tournament. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.